So it's my great pleasure to introduce today's program, starting with our Lois Ahrens, who lives in Northampton. She's one of the jewels of the valley that some people have heard speak before and know what I'm talking about because of her vast experience and activism in the area of incarceration of all levels, including the issues of race. So I'm going to give a somewhat lengthy introduction to Ahrens to Lois because of her lengthy experience. So she's the founding director of the Real Cost of Prisons Project. It's a national organization, and it was begun in 2000 by Lois, and it brings together activists, artists, justice policy researchers, and people directly experiencing the impacts of mass incarceration in order to end the carceral state. The Real Cost of Prisons Project has produced 3 comics. This is one of them, and it's on the back table, and they're free, so please help yourself. It looks like this. So these are also distributed for free around the country to people incarcerated and not. So it's a valuable tool for helping people to understand the whole system that we operate in. There is a website for this project called the realcostofprisons.org, so people can access it and see also the other publications. So Lois was a founding member and a core group member of the National Council for Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls. And she's also a consultant to a lot of projects that are led by formerly incarcerated women. In Massachusetts, she's led many campaigns, one of them to stop the building of new prisons, another to end the videotaping by guards of women who are being strip searched as they're being admitted or during any part of their incarceration, to end money bail, and to create alternatives to incarceration. Lois believes we can only fundamentally change mass incarceration and mass criminalization through the leadership of formerly incarcerated men and women and their loved ones. Now, when I called Lois to ask if she would come today, and I said, well, our topic is about race in the prison system, and what she said was, racism is the prison system. And with that, I'd like to turn the program over to Lois to give us an overview of this issue.
Okay, can you hear me? Yes. Good. So thank you to Cheryl. Thank you to everybody that worked on this. Cheryl and I have had many emails and conversations back and forth, and so hopefully we're on the same page about what she wanted and what I'm going to talk about. I do want to just say one thing about those comic books. There were 3 of them. One is on the war on drugs, one's on women, and one's on the building and siting of prisons. I printed 135,000 of those comic books, and basically that stack that you see there is kind of what's left of the comic books. Wow. So if you want to see the comic books and you have access to a computer, which of course most people in prison don't have, most of them were sent to people in prison. You can go to the Real Cost of Prisons website, and there's a page called comic books, and you can click on that, and then you'll see the other comic books if you want to read them. I thought I would start with a minute of history, or maybe it's going to be 2 minutes. So 2019, which maybe everybody knows, is the 400th anniversary of when the first 19 Africans were brought to this country. And they were captured off a Spanish slave ship, and they were brought to Jamestown in Virginia. And so this is the 400th anniversary of the beginning of enslaved people in the United States. 2019 is. In 1865, the 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution passed, which abolished slavery and involuntary servitude, with one exception. And that exception was for punishment of a crime. And that exception in the 13th Amendment is the thing that allows people to work, prisoners, to work for no pay or almost no pay today. So it started back then, and we're living it now. In Massachusetts, for example, prisoners can earn between 14 cents an hour because of this amendment, or exception to the amendment, or up to $1 an hour. So, I mean, there are other states, depending on what their industries are, where it can be a little bit more. But some states, there's work for no pay at all, zero pay. So slavery's end was followed by Reconstruction. People remember what that was, including the policing and targeting of African Americans and convicting African Americans for vagrancy and loitering. And by convictions, I mean no judge and no jury. Basically, people were just yanked, black people, former enslaved people were just yanked off the street. And when they were yanked off the street, often what they were yanked into was convict labor. And so once people became, quote, convicts by the sheriffs of whatever town they were in, then people were basically sold out or leased out to industries throughout the South. And often there's a fantastic book called Slavery by Another Name about this. It's an amazing book, a really distressing book. But basically what happened was the brutality of convict leasing in a lot of instances was worse than slavery, because under slavery, they were actually somebody's property. Here, there were human beings that were just leased. If they died, they died. And they would lease somebody else. So it was actually a more brutal system. And a lot of the big, heavy industries, for example, in the South, in Birmingham, steel industries and mining in the South was built on convict labor, convict leasing labor. And amazingly, that convict leasing system didn't end until 1923. So it's it comes way up into the 20th century. The other thing I was thinking about this morning was prior to, when slavery was still in existence, there were people who were slave catchers. And so all of these things like predate, the reason that they're important is because they're important and what happened to people, but they also predate the kind of policing, the kind of racist policing this is the antecedents of the kind of policing that we have now. So that's what policing, this kind of policing is built on. This is the history, the actual history of policing. And part of that policing during slavery were people who were slave catchers. And so they came up into places that were not slave states and tried to capture slaves that escaped. And one of those people that was one of these slave catchers, was someone named Riker. People know what Rikers Island is. He was a slave catcher. And so now this horrible, horrible, horrible jail in New York is Rikers Island. And one of the people that Riker tried to capture was David Ruggles, who the Ruggles Center is named after, who ended up escaping and coming to Florence and starting this abolitionist, or one of the people in the abolitionist community. So this like comes right into us here, you know. I mean, we're not separated from any of this. The other thing that happened after Reconstruction was the creation or the institution of of towns, cities that were called sundown towns. And what those were, if you were a black person and you were caught after the sun went down, you could be captured, you could be beaten, you could be jailed. And this was something that wasn't peculiar to the South. This was something that happened all through the North and the Northeast. In Levittown, New York, which people might know about, it's on Long Island, was a sundown town. Almost all of the cities and towns of Illinois were sundown towns. And sundown towns didn't end until the 60s. So, I mean, you know, while some of this starts as, you know, like the history 400 years ago, you know, this is bringing us right to where we're at now. And of course, then followed Reconstruction, all of the Jim Crow laws, which I assume people know about, institutionalized, racialized, apartheid, and segregation. And those started to be broken down in the 50s and in the 60s. And then there was the response of the Civil Rights Movement, and then there was the response of the Black Power movement in the 60s and 70s. And then, interestingly enough, we start having the beginning of the criminalization of people that we have now. So, I mean, so that's the really short history of this, but it's one continuous line. It's one continuous line. This isn't like an aberration this time. This is part of what's always been going on. This is like baked into the system for 400 years. So then, you know, there was not only the war on drugs, there was COINTELPRO, which some people might know about. There were all of the things that created the undoing, or tried to create the undoing of the progress of civil rights and Black power. And that started then, and, you know, like we're still there. We're still there. So, so this is a talk about Massachusetts mostly, but within the context of the United States. And afterwards, after my talk, I'd be glad to answer any questions, or we can talk about, I mean, other people will talk after me. But I'll also be glad to answer questions. And so my talk, it's not like how I got involved with this, or my personal this, or my personal that. So if people are interested in that kind of thing, I'll be glad to talk about that afterwards, but that's not what the talk is. So here's a little context about Massachusetts from Mass Inc., which is this think tank. It says, quote, particularly on issues of equality and racial justice, Massachusetts is near the bottom, placing 45th on income inequality and 40th in terms of racial gaps. The data on Boston, so I'll tell you why it is Boston, explains why. Boston is the most unequal city in the United States. The median white family has amassed $265,500 in assets in Boston, compared to $700 for Black households and less than $15,000 for Hispanic households. So why is this important? Because it's important, right, to know this. But the other reason it's important for people in Massachusetts to know this, even if we're not in Boston, even if we're living out here, is this is where the majority of the lawmakers live. Not here, there. So this is the people that are making the laws. This is the majority of the Massachusetts legislature. This is the air they breathe. This is the water that they swim in. This is how they were raised. This is their context for thinking about the world, this extreme inequality. And so it's important to know that because, I mean, to a large degree, until maybe hopefully now, they're the people that are creating the laws that are impacting the incarceration and criminalization of people in Massachusetts. And they've grown up in this very segregated, completely unequal bubble. And that's what they operate out of. So U.S. News ranked Massachusetts 31st in educational equality, that is, like, and 19th in employment equality. Now, Bob Fleischer, who's somebody who works for the Center for Public Representation in Northampton, he wrote this a year or so ago. Quote, the most recent two budgets from the Baker administration are on the verge of restoring the Department of Mental Health budget to where it was 10 years ago. Meanwhile, the state budget for prisons and probation increased by 12% between 2001 and 2017. That is a more than $146 million increase. So you can see where the priorities are and what the impacts of that is. It's underfunding mental health and overfunding, of course, I think, of prisons and jails. So the Prison Policy Initiative, which is in East Hampton actually, said that 56% of state prisoners and 64% of people in jail have a mental health problem. So how are they being treated? They're being treated not in the community, because that's underfunded. They're being treated in prisons and jails. Not treated, they're being locked up in prisons and jails, which is where the money is still going. For women in jail, 82% of women who've been jailed have experienced sexual violence. That is, they need mental health help. And it's not in jails, and guess what? It's not in the community either. So now for a bigger picture. 2.3, you probably know this, 2.3 million people are caged in prisons and jails in the United States, including 10,000 that are children who are housed in adult jails. There are another 3.7 million people on probation and another 840,000 in parole. So this is more than 7 million people at any given time are under the correctional thumb. They might be out in the community, they might be wearing electronic monitoring, they might have to report for this or that, they might have to be paying fees, they might have to have their probation officer show up or parole officer show up, or they might actually be incarcerated. So it's a huge amount of control. So not only is this number, there are 2.7 million children who have an incarcerated parent. 1 in every 28 kids. 1 in 9 African American children. 1 in 57 white children. And I also want to include in this number, which is like this almost incalculable number. I mean, nobody has actually tried to calculate it that I know about. The tens of millions of mothers, sisters, fathers, brothers, loved ones, friends who are impacted by the criminal legal system because they have family members and loved ones who are incarcerated. So if you take this number of 7 million or 7.2 million, whatever it is, and then you make the bigger impact of who is impacted, it's millions and millions and millions of people. And so it's a huge, huge system and a huge impact of so many millions of people all over the country, and people, of course, living in our midst. So while people of color, that is, Black people and Latino people and Asian people, make up about 25% of the United States population, they account for 58% of those people who are in prison. incarcerates disproportionately impact men of color. 1 of every 6 African American men have been incarcerated. And I'm going to take questions later. And so I mean, I'll keep coming back to this over and again. This is not because of greater criminality, and I will talk about how this system moves and how it creates this kind of incarceration. In 1970, there were 8,000 women in jail. Today, there are 110,000 women in jail. In the 1970s, the total number of people, men and women, in prison and jail was 250,000. Now, there are 220,000 women in prison and jail. And so we've gone from 250,000 people in prison and jail in the early 70s to 2.3 million people. So if you look at a graph, usually I have like my one visual aid, and it's a graph, and it starts, let's say, in the 1920s, and it goes to the 1970s. And it's just this line that goes across for all those years, you know, starting in the 20s or 10s or whatever, and then going to the 70s. And then when you get to the 70s, it goes like this. It's this complete line going like right to the corner of the paper, to the top of the paper. And this is where we're at now. This is where we're at now, that line going up. So this place that we're at, I mean, depending on your age, 1970s actually is in our recent history. Right? So this is something that was been constructed in the last 40 years. It wasn't always like this. This is the aberrant time. Not that. That was the normal time, 250,000. For all those years, 1910, 20, 30, blah, 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 blah. So this is the aberrant time that we're in. And right now what's happening is like some people are starting to wake up and saying, holy shit, you know, what are we going to do about this? And so, you know, so we're at this wake-up time. We're at this wake-up time for some people. Not, of course, everybody. So there are millions and millions of people who are infected. Almost all of whom lack the money to find justice in the criminal legal system. Almost all of whom live in neighborhoods that are over-policed and racially policed. Neighborhoods which began to feel the effects of disinvestment, were being written off beginning with Nixon, beginning with Reagan, and neoliberal policies of the 70s, which were about disinvestment in communities, disinvestment in privatization, we're living with it now. Disinvestment in housing, disinvestment in public education, disinvestment, right? But not disinvestment in other things, investment in other things. So it wasn't all just, you know. So beginning with the Johnson administration until now, poor communities and communities of color have been criminalized not only by the war on drugs, but by the criminalization of mental illness, steering children into the criminal legal system through zero-tolerance policies in schools, public schools to prison pipeline, and using police basically as an occupying force that not only includes stop and frisk, but policing that results in the deaths of names that we know now: Walter Scott, Sandra Bland, Rakia Boyd, Eric Garner, Tamir Rice, and Michael Brown, and many, many, many others. So I believe that mass incarceration and mass criminalization is a response to the civil rights gains and the Black Power movement that was made in the 50s and 60s. And a response about what to do with people that are no longer needed in the economy that we have now. It's a system that is built on racism and control of the poor. So in 1998, Angela Davis wrote, prisons do not disappear problems, they disappear human beings. So the unprecedented increase in caged people is not because of greater criminality, but at least for 4 reasons, and I'll go through some of the reasons. First is the war on drugs, which I'm sure people have heard about, which targets and destabilizes African American neighborhoods and communities with extreme policing like stop and frisk and driving, or if you're in a city, while walking, while black. With long mandatory minimum sentences for drug convictions, which allow for no judicial discretion. Like you look at a chart, you see the weight, that's what you get. So I want to reiterate, I mean, I'm going to keep saying this, black men and women are criminalized in ways that white people are not, including things like stop and frisk. In the last 40 years, all convictions result in long sentences as a result of tough on crime ideology that started in the 60s, actually, and which we're living with now. A sentence in 1986 for a drug offense was about 2 years, and now that sentence is 5 years. A sentence for burglary in the United States is an average 16 months. In Canada, that same crime, that same conviction, is 5 months. As of 2016, there were 161,957 people serving life sentences in the United States. 1 in every 9 people in prison. Now, this issue of life without the possibility of parole is something that I've been working on for years and years and years because of the huge increase. I have many friends serving life. I have 2 really good friends who died while serving life. And this is something that I'll talk more about this, is just beginning to be discussed now about how horrible this sentence is, to convict somebody and sentence them to prison for their entire life. Often the majority of people that get life sentences are people of color, and the majority of those people are young people, people who have been convicted in their early 20s or sometimes even younger than that, 18 years, 19 years, to be convicted for to be sentenced for their whole entire life in prison. And so this is, to me, this absolute outrage. In Massachusetts, there are 959 men and women serving life without the possibility of parole. Another 1,018 are serving life with the possibility of parole. The only catch to that is that people aren't being paroled. There's a 28% parole rate for lifers. So you have the possibility of parole, but you could go up in front of the parole board and get a 2-year setback or get a 5-year setback, and then you have to go back again, and then you have to get it back again. And basically you have virtual life, but it's with the possibility of parole. As long as you have a parole board that doesn't want to parole anybody, which is Massachusetts, then it doesn't matter almost that, I mean, yeah, people eventually, theoretically, with life with the possibility of parole will get out. But for so many people, so there are about 9,000 people in state prisons in Massachusetts, between people who are lifers, people that have life with no possibility, and people with possibility. That's 2,000 people out of 9,000 people have these intensely horrible I mean, sentences, intensely horrible sentences. In 1977, there were 170 people serving life without parole in Massachusetts. So these are the kinds, when I say punitive sentencing, how people are, what has the escalation of sentence. People go, oh, there's somebody in prison. What are you going to do about that? Like, how can you change that? And my response is, oh, let people out. You know, if there are too many, let them out.
Yeah.
What does somebody need to be sitting there for 30 years for? Or 25 years? Okay. Let them out. Not just here, but everywhere. That's a way to reduce the prison population. And that, to me, is one of the things that I endorse, favor. And it's finally beginning to happen that other people are starting to think, oh yeah, we want to reduce the prison population. Let's see, what can we do?
Stop them resting on it.
We can
and
let them out. Let them out. So we have this punitive system that's based on retribution. It's not based on, they're all called Department of Corrections, right? There's nothing correcting about these departments of corrections. They're based on control, they're based on retribution. Well, I won't go through the statistics. So 56% of the people that were convicted of life without the possibility of parole were convicted for offenses as juveniles. Right? The time when people are, especially young men, most, let's say, out of control, right? This is when they're arrested. This is when they're convicted. So that's one reason we have so many people in prison. The other thing that goes hand in glove with this, I mean, you can't have one without the other, is the increased power of district attorneys, resulting in huge increases in plea bargains and the incarceration of many people who fear going to trial because the district attorney piles up all these charges and says, if you go to trial, you're going to have to go to trial on all of these charges. Or, guess what? Take a plea. Take a plea. And so what do people do? Especially if you're not a millionaire, right? Or a multimillionaire. You don't have a big lawyer. You don't have, you have a public defender who could be great, but you could have, he or she could have 1,000 cases instead of a private, lawyer that you pay a ton of money to that has 20 cases that paying just attention to you. What do? You take a plea. So despite all these like TV shows, like court shows with the lawyers and the blah, 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 and the juries, 95% of cases are plea bargained. So that the rest, 5%, go to trial. Sorry?
Massachusetts.
Everywhere. Plea bargains. District attorneys. So like in Massachusetts, in 2012, Massachusetts passed a 3 strikes law, right? Which the last state to pass 3 strikes before Massachusetts was Arizona in 2005. So progressive Massachusetts, right? This is what overwhelmingly voted for this. And one of the reasons that all the DAs really wanted this was that it's another hammer that they could have used. Okay, if you don't accept this plea, we're going to charge you with 3 strikes. We're going to charge you as a habitual felon. And you're going to sit there for a long, long time. So that was another hammer for DAs, which passed overwhelmingly in the state legislature. And at the time, every single rep and senator from Western Mass voted for that. We spent a year fighting and we lost.
When was that?
2012. So I mean, this is recent history. But I mean, this is the DAs constantly trying to work to accumulate more power so that they have more power over people to do what? Extract plea bargains. That's, that's what they want to do. So, this study said it looked at 5 key points in the criminal case when prosecutors have significant discretion. They examined the prosecutor's decision about, about which cases to accept, right? Which to dismiss, which they could do. What to recommend at bail hearings, right? A lot or a little, or theoretically, nothing, right? What plea bargains to offer, and what sentences to recommend. So this is the power of DAs. And they are in control of that. They are in control of that. That is, they are the principal drivers of the kind of incarceration that we have now. Now, here in Franklin County, here in Hampshire County, we have Dave Sullivan, our DA. Everybody thinks, oh, good old Dave Sullivan, he's such a great guy, shows up everywhere. But he is doing these same things. We don't know the plea bargains that we don't know the charges he is loading up with people. We don't know who he's targeting and no, what we know is, guess what? He's against domestic violence, right? Like, who's not against domestic violence? That's what we see that's what we see of Dave Sullivan. Dave Sullivan was the first DA in the country to charge and get a conviction for manslaughter for a guy who was an addict who sold heroin to another guy who overdosed and died. So that's our good old Dave Sullivan. He was the first DA in the country to do that. He set the precedent for doing that. So to me, he's not such a great guy, despite the fact that you always see him, at least I see him in the paper, I don't know whether you get that much up here. He's always like, Mr. Affability. So race, not surprisingly, turned out to be significantly a factor at every stage of all of these things that I just, except the initial decision to accept cases. For example, research shows that black people are more likely, which probably everybody knows, stopped, arrested, and detained before trial, not have opportunities for reduced charges and plea deals, receive harsher penalties, and serve longer prison terms in prisons than white people with the same exact situations and convictions. So this isn't like this thing where people are like, oh yeah, we're getting it worse. This is like statistically shown that this is what happens. So 95% of elected prosecutors as DAs are white. 88% of lawyers are white. Now, in Massachusetts and other places around the country, Massachusetts just elected in Suffolk County the first black woman DA, Rachel Rollins. And we'll see, we'll see how she does. We'll see if she ran as a progressive DA, right? And we'll see. Maybe she will be. I mean, she's got all of these things that she said she would not do, not charge people with. And we'll see how it pans out. There are other, there's a black woman DA in Chicago now. There's a black woman DA in Baltimore now. There is a new woman DA in Houston, a Hispanic woman in Miami. There's a white guy, Larry Krasner, in Philly who, ran and is running or acting as progressive DA. So it could be that we've reached, at least in some places, this tipping point where people have said, oh, enough. Enough. We want a different kind of DA, and we're willing to, and different kinds of people. People that have it, most people, most DAs start off as assistant DAs, and then they run for DA. So these are people that have been running, a lot of the people have been running, they haven't started out as prosecutors. Larry Krasner, the guy in Philly, was a defense lawyer. So, you know, like in the people in opposition to the prosecutors. So they're running against, you know, an atypical profile for a DA. I mean, a really atypical profile for a DA. So we'll see. So number 4, this is all about why so many people in prison, right? Much higher bail. And fewer and fewer people being released on personal recognizance. In every jail, every single jail in the country, at least half the number of people that are there for one reason and one reason only, and that is because they can't make bail. So any jail you walk into, Franklin County, Hampshire County, Hampden County, one in Kansas City, doesn't matter where you go, that's who's locked up there. And often for very, very little bail. Not for $1 million, like R. Kelly, right? But for $500. So people are sitting in jail because they don't have $500 for bail. Studies have found that African Americans who are arrested are assigned higher bail amounts than whites with similar charges and similar histories. So, I mean, there are all of these places where you can see the system is like going in, could go this way, but it goes this way. So research has shown that those who are detained before trial, that are people being held pre-trial, they haven't been convicted of anything, are 3 times more likely to be sentenced to prison than those who paid bail. Why? Well, they're not out. They go before the judge. The judge says, well, what have you been doing? Well, I've been sitting in jail because I can't make bail. You know, maybe I've been going to AA or something like that. But the person that can bail themselves out or gets out without bail can say, oh, well, I decided to take a class, or I managed to get a job, or I'm, you know, reconnected with my family. All the things that people can do when they're out. But if you're sitting in jail, guess what? Mm-hmm. It's stacked against you. The judge is like, oh, this person hasn't been doing anything. Well, yeah, they've been sitting in jail. People who were held pre-trial, they also found were more likely to be arrested again at a later date. Why? Because they've been sitting in jail. They finally get out. They can't get a job. They've lost the place that they're going to live. Their life, even if their life was like this before they went to jail, is suddenly like this. And so it's a lot harder to get your life going if you've been sitting in jail. So, so one of the things that, I mean, so there are 450,000 people sitting in jail every day. Mostly because, what? They're too poor. They're poor. That's why. They're poor. So one of the things that, if you don't remember anything that I'm saying, the one message that I want you to remember is that if you think of Massachusetts as a progressive state, when it comes to the criminal legal system, when it comes to mass incarceration, Massachusetts is at the bottom of the pile. Massachusetts is not a progressive state, partly because of these legislators that I was talking about who are living in Boston, and everybody they know is making at least, or has assets of $250,000. And they've all gone to Boston College, and they've all become prosecutors, and then they run for office. And then they're making the laws, right? That's who they are. That's who most of our legislators are. So they're the ones, I mean, up until recently, I mean, like November, are the ones who are, they're still the majority of these people, white men, that trajectory. Grew up in Boston, went to Boston College, became lawyers, became prosecutors, became reps or senators. There they are. They're our lawmakers, right? And so they are the people that are making the laws that are creating this kind of incarceration system that we have. And so Massachusetts is not a progressive state. It doesn't matter about, you know, the environment, it doesn't matter about, oh, we're first to gay marriage or blah, blah, blah. If it comes to the criminal legal system, we are way, way, way behind, way behind. So 3 strikes I mentioned passed here, 2012, not exactly an act of progressive legislation. Massachusetts and Arkansas are the only states that sentence people to solitary confinement for up to 10 years in something called the Disciplinary Detention Unit, DDU. Right? This is a policy, it's not a law. A law could change it, but the Department of So-Called Corrections could change this tomorrow if they wanted to. In the US, there are approximately 80,000 men and women held in solitary confinement. The UN Special Rapporteur on Torture found that even a few days in solitary can have severe negative effects, and that more than 15 days in solitary constitutes torture. So here in Massachusetts, people are being locked up for up to 10 years, right? Now, 10 years is really long. There are, every jail, every prison has solitary. Not maybe 10 years, but maybe 6 months is nothing, right? It's nothing compared to what people can get or how long people get locked up. In Massachusetts, roughly 640 of the approximately 9,000 state prisoners are in segregation every day. This means they're locked in a concrete box the size of a parking space for 22 hours a day, 7 days a week. And so this is also true about jails. My new state rep, Lindsay Sabadoso, went, I saw her yesterday, she went to the Hampshire County Jail. And she's a new rep, she got the dog and pony show from the sheriff there, Kaylee, and she said she wanted to see solitary. And so he took her. Here's this jail that has 200 people in it, right? He's got 24 solitary cells. Oh my gosh. Why? Why? He only had, at the time, 4 people locked up in there. But nonetheless, that's what he's got. He just got money, $4.9 million from the state to refurbish these modular units, right? Without asking anybody, without anything. He just got the money, right? Which is how it goes here in Massachusetts. And so, I mean, maybe he could have, I mean, of course, there could be very, very fewer people, like at least half of the 200 people are there. Why? Because they can't make bail, right? He could take some of those 24 solitary units and forget the modular units and the $4.9 million and turn them into cells. I'm not advocating more cells, but I'm advocating less solitary and less money given to him to do this. And the other thing that she found out was, so there was this bill, which maybe people heard about, they said, oh, landmark, blah, 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 Criminal Justice Reform Act. It was passed last April. Got a ton of publicity. And it basically tinkered around the edges with a lot of things that needed to be done. And it made recommendations about solitary. A lot of recommendations about solitary. Just last week, Prisoners Legal Services, which is prison advocacy for prisoners, testified in front of the Department of Corrections how every single recommendation, which were not that great, has not been followed. Nothing. And there was supposed to be a commission to study solitary that the CJRA created all these commissions. And this is the only commission that has not been formed yet. So Lindsay, when she goes to see Kayoline, he's showing her around, and she says, how many people, and she says, how long do they stay locked up in a cell? And he says, oh, they get 3 hours outside of the cell instead of 2 hours, which was what originally they get. And the reason he did that is because if they get out 3 hours outside of the cell, then he's not under the auspices of this new law that was passed, the Criminal Justice Reform Act. So by giving people an extra hour outside the cell, he has managed to circumvent this law. You know, and here's this other guy, everybody says, oh, he's such a great guy, right? But had she not gone up there, had she not had this conversation, had we not had this conversation, we wouldn't know that that is what he is up to. And I guarantee you that there are a ton of other sheriffs that are also, just like the Department of Correction, figuring out how to get around this law, that are finding ways to still keep people locked up in solitary for much longer than they should, I mean way longer than they should, and for these ways of not being under the auspices of this law that was passed. And so that, you know, to me, that is like an example of, you know, how Massachusetts functions. And there's nobody really that sheriffs are reporting to. I always say each one is a king of his own castle. What they do, nobody is saying to them, well, who's there? How many people are locked up? How many people are in solitary? How many? There was in this Criminal Justice Reform Act, all of these things that were written in saying you need to start reporting to the Department of Corrections about what you do. And I guarantee you, not one sheriff has still done this yet. Because they're used to just being completely free agents about what they do. So, as I said, so the other reason that so many people are locked up is because of bail. So I wanted to say a couple of things about, like one thing that's going on in Hampden County, which maybe some of you have read about, which is Kochi, who's the new sheriff in Hampden County, has, out of the goodness of his heart, because he's such a great, kind guy, has decided that he will turn over 86 of his beds to people that are sectioned under Section 35. That is, people who are not convicted of anything. They're people that are locked up because of substance abuse disorder or alcohol. So right now, 86 people in Hampden County are locked up in jail because they are addicted to drugs or alcohol, not because they've committed any crime. And so he is the first person in the state to do this. And so instead of having investment in community treatment, instead of having treatment on demand, he is locking up people in the jail because he cares so much about people. That's what he said. That's what all the press conference was. What a great guy he is. And so this is a really bad trend in Massachusetts. Starting in Hampden County, and as people, there was a decision that allowed the possibility of bail or no bail release, called the Brannigan decision, that judge had to say, if I'm going to keep you locked up, why I'm going to keep you locked up, not just money. And once that gets implemented, once that decision gets implemented, many, many, many fewer people would go to jail because they don't have money. And the jails would be what? They would be a lot emptier. And so, who can they fill the jails with? Well, out of the goodness of their hearts. they can fill those jails with people who have substance use disorder. And that's what's starting to happen. It's already happening in Hampden County. This guy who's a sheriff of Bristol County, who is like the worst sheriff in Massachusetts, his name is Hodgson, he's following. Now, one good thing is that there is a bill that many of us encourage legislators to file that would say, if it passed, that you cannot do this. You cannot lock people in jail only because they've been Section 35. And we'll see if it happens. There's a big list of legislation out on the table there, which I really hope everybody takes. And it talks about that bill. It talks about a bill that for the first time in Massachusetts, if it passed, which is a big if, it will take a long time for it to pass, would eliminate life without the possibility of parole. Everybody would get up to 25 years, and then there would be the possibility of parole. The possibility of parole. This is a trend that's happening around the country, and so somebody has introduced this bill here in Massachusetts. It's super important. It's super important that your legislators hear from you. That, you know, like they got to hear from somebody other than me. Right? I mean, they like see my email, they know, right? And so this is a list of, there's a couple of really bad bills that are listed on here, but the rest are good bills, some of which have, there's one for presumption of parole, that when you get to your parole date, the presumption is that you will be paroled. So there's a bill for that. There's a bill for, in 2000, Progressive Massachusetts decided that people who are incarcerated should no longer have the vote. And it was on the ballot. Some of you might remember this. And it passed by 65% to take away the vote. And it was the only time that a civil right was taken from someone, right? Voted out. So it was voted out. And so now there is a bill. Hines is the senator from part of Franklin County, Berkshire County. He has introduced a bill to restore voting rights to people who are incarcerated. What a concept. So there actually is, legislation that is taking place, that's been introduced, that it's going to be like a long haul before it actually passes. But there is the possibility that things could actually pass. But people need, legislators need to hear from people who say to them, you know, I'm interested in this. You need to support this bill. You need to tell the people that introduce the bill that it's important and we want to hear from you. We want to know that you are supporting this legislation. So I really encourage you to take this and look, and, you know, find your legislator and ask them. Some of your legislators have sponsored some of these bills, but a lot haven't. Like Natalie Blake, she hasn't, but she could if somebody actually talked to her about why this is important. But probably nobody's talked to her. You know, she probably hasn't heard from constituents say, this is important to me. You know, I want you to co-sponsor it. I want you to know that it's happening. So, I'm of course going over time. Let me just read a couple of things, and then I'll finally stop. So what can you do? So, as I was just saying, you can find out what legislation is happening, because there's now finally the possibility of something good happening in Massachusetts. Finally. And it's not going to happen tomorrow, all these changes, but it's at least we're finally like going in some kind of right direction. There is an organization called the Western Mass Prison Abolition Network, which is on my list there of legislation. They're raising money, and what do? They bail people out. They bail people out. So you can be part of that. There is, some of you may know, there is the Great Falls Book Through Bars organization. Great organization. Collecting books and sending them to people who are incarcerated. They're at Turner's Falls. You can be part of that. You can read letters from people who are in prison. Hear what is going on from the people that are actually having it happen to them. You can question this propaganda that you see on these crime shows and news about crime and criminals. You know, we can question, you know, we hear Trump, we think, oh, that's bull, right? Everybody knows to question. But people don't question the propaganda that we get about crime and criminals. People believe that propaganda. We need to have the same kind of questioning, discernment about that as we do about everything, because it's also propaganda. We need to start thinking that people who commit a crime are not that crime. They committed the crime, they did the crime, they paid the consequences, are paying the consequences. They are not, for once and ever, a criminal, an ex-offender, an ex-felon. They are people that committed a crime, and now the crime has been dealt with, and now let us let people move on. Let us change our thinking about who people are that have been locked up. The other thing which people here are doing is to look at the causes of mass incarceration, which is what? Racism, poverty. People need to do that. White people need to do that. We need to look at that. And if we don't look at that, nothing is going to change. Nothing is going to change. The criminal legal system creates more harm, more poverty, more violence. So really, anything that we can do in our lives to abolish it is the thing that we need to be aware of and focus on and do. Anything that we can do to undo this horrible, horrible system. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Oh, I should get a mic. Sorry. Lois we'll do question and answers for Lois after our next speakers, but we want to hear now the voices of people who have been inside of this system that Lois has described to us in sufficient detail so that I think we will take action after today, hopefully on these issues that Lois raised and the bills that are before our Congress. Chevy and Carrie, would you mind coming up here, and we'll put an extra chair up here. We're going to hear from Chevy Van Pickup, who lives in Turner's, formerly incarcerated. He identifies as being a member of the Cherokee Nation. He is, I told you when we were having a chat before, that he's been certified as a serve-safe, is that the term? Oh, yeah. Serve-safe person who can work in a kitchen, a commercial kitchen, because he's been certified to be able to do that work. And he's also a contractor, has a contracting license, so those are some of his accomplishments. And then we have his friend Carrie Williamson, that Chevy was able to bring today, and Carrie will talk about his experiences. So I'm going to start with Chevy, and if you could, you have the hand mic, the lapel mic on you still?
Yeah.
Maybe you could give that to Chevy, and then we can. So Chevy will start, and then Carrie, who also lives locally and was also formerly incarcerated.
I wasn't sure how I was going to be able to talk in front of everyone because I was kind of nervous or whatever. And when Cheryl and my friend Strong Oak, they asked me to do this, I was like kind of nervous, and I was like, I know this guy, he'll do it. For whatever reason, he's right here, so I felt like he could have did a better job than me. And so like I met with Cheryl and I met with Strong Oak, and so they just wanted me to share my experience, and like we've gone over it and I've thought about it, and like now that I'm in front of you, it's kind of nervous. And like I have like these really good things that I wanted to say and good points, and I appreciate everything that Lois had to say, because I've like pretty much experienced it all, from like being incarcerated as a juvenile to like the county jail, and I've watched the like evolution of the county jail from like the old jail. I actually watched literally watched them build the new jail, because I used to work in the laundry room in the jail, and I sat there watching them dig and blow up, and I was actually one of the first inmates to move from the old jail into the new jail. I started doing time when I was 18 years old, and I was like, I kind of wanted to talk about my prison stuff, but it was, and like it's hard for me to kind of have like a direct angle. It was better when I was with Cheryl and Strong Oak and they were asking me questions, because then I could like, because I wanted to try to get like people, I wanted not necessarily tell people what they wanted to hear, but tell people what I saw at what they wanted in that situation or whatever. So here I am, like I don't know if, like what color I look like to you guys or whatever, if it even matters. But I'm Native American, I'm also Irish. And so when you, I'm Cherokee, obviously, she told you that. But when you go to prison, it's like they kind of sort of brand you, you know? And it's like, or you brand yourself. So here in Massachusetts, they have like a specific prison where you go, and they brand you as far as like race, gang affiliation, like where you're from, obviously your color or whatever, and then so they grade you by your criminal history. Your if you're a non-violent offender or a violent offender. So when I went to prison, I hadn't gotten in trouble in prison, but because I had gotten in trouble so much in county jail, I got classified to Shirley Maximum State Prison. And like, so like, we were talking about like the racism, you know. And like, you think of it, racism, like black, white, color, whatever, and like I like a lot of the stuff that Lois was talking about, and like, it makes you look deeper into it. But it was like, so like, in prison, like me and Strong Oak and Cheryl were talking about how the prison is more, like say for instance, like people are looking at like, oh, color, but it's not, like I look at the prison system as like being more segregated. Like we'll call it segregation because it's gangs. Like in Shirley Max, there's two sides of the prison. There's a gray side and a green side. And Lois would have probably been segregated to one of the sides because of her tattoo, because she has a 5-point star, I think, right there. And so it has to do with, like, I'm not in a gang, and I never, for whatever reason, like, I'm not, like, whatever, never joined a gang. And so, like, I was talking to my brother and running some stuff by him and talking about racism and stuff like that. And I was like, just saying, where do we stand, you know? And my brother says, because who we are, he says we're mutual. So I could go to the gray side of the prison, I could go to the green side of the prison, I can go anywhere and I can be with anybody. But, yeah, I've seen racism, like I've seen, but it's not, like, I don't know if Massachusetts, like, in my eyes, like, as far as, like, obviously there's white gangs, you know, and, like, yeah, there's some white supremacists and stuff like that, but there isn't a lot of them. And, like, it's more like, if you're from Charlestown, you know, there's a Charlestown where it's all white guys, you know? And then, like, there's Boston, and, like, say, for instance, like, there's, it's segregated by, like, streets. And, like, so, because this guy lives on this street, he's on this side of the prison, because the guys on that street want to kill them. It doesn't matter what color they are. In Shirley Max, there's a lot of black people trying to kill black people, you know? There's white people trying to kill white people. Like, and, like, yeah, when you go to sit down in the chow hall, because obviously everybody, one of our biggest things of, like, we all have to eat, you know? But Shirley Max is, like, it's segregated by violence, because they want to keep everybody. So, like, half the prison doesn't even, like, more than half the prison doesn't even go to the chow hall. They're not even allowed to leave the block where they live. Like, they have, because I worked in the chow hall in Shirley Max. I worked there in the chow for like 8 months, and like, so I knew all, like, the meals, like, we put them on carts and they get pushed to the block wherever the people live. And I don't know, luckily I was able to get out of Shirley Max alive. And it's like Shirley Max is, like, basically like gladiator school. And, like, because I'm not in a gang or whatever, I'm not like decorated, or, like, nobody's looking for me, or, like, I don't ever have to, like, I never had to like stand up really, and, like, more or less it's like always sticking up for somebody else, or, you know. But I was, like, so, like, you have to choose, like, whether you're, like, sort of what color you are, you know. And me, I look white, and, like, yeah, I'm like a Native American at heart, you know what I mean? And, like in Shirley Max, like, so when you go to a special unit, and it's a unit that eats in the chow hall, you have to find a place to sit. Like, in the Shirley Max, each table has 4 chairs. And, like, these, like, people, a lot of lifers, a lot of people that have been in prison for a long time, they fought for them tables. Like, those tables, if, say, for instance, those 4 guys that sit at that table, if they don't go to chow, nobody will sit in their table. Like, and, like, when you go into the chow hall, when you go into the prison in Shirley Max, it's sort of like this. Like, you go in, you grab your food, it's fed through a little hole like this in the wall, and, like, you walk to the center and you walk down the middle, and you go get your drink or whatever, and then you have to follow the outside of the tables. You can't cut through because people are scared or always on guard, and, like, so, like, and then, so, like, this section right here is the white people, like Lowell, Boston, Fall River, or whatever, like, and then, like, the Spanish people, those are their tables. Like, over here's the black people, not necessarily black people, like, we'll say Bloods or whatever. There's there's some white kids that are in the Bloods gang, they grew up in it, or maybe they came to prison and like they're like, oh, I want to join a gang. And like they'll let you join. It's like, say for instance, if I wanted to join a black gang or a white gang, they'll let you join. Like, and because they're gonna have you do something savage, like they're gonna be like, okay, well, you want to join? They're gonna test you, and they're gonna be like, all right, well, you, they're gonna tell you when the time's right, then you gotta do this, and then they make you do commit an act of violence on another gang or whatever. I was scared in the chow hall. Like, so, whenever I got to my unit, they're like, oh, you gotta, I reached out to a couple of people and I'm like, hey, I need a place to sit. And they're like, oh, they pointed me in the direction. So I was sitting with the white guys in the white section. And like, so like I said, people will fight for their tables. And so there was a guy over here and he was just by himself and he said these other guys wanted to take over his table. And like if anything happened that we were gonna have to help him. And I'm like, what? I was like, that's not my table. And because I'm white, in the white section, we have to stick up for all the other guys. And I was like, man, I don't even want to go to the chow hall no more. I was like, I'm trying to get the hell out of here, you know? I was like, I wanted to get out of Shirley Mack's prison. And like, I ended up getting into the culinary arts program there, and I worked and like dealt with like a lot of the good food, and like, you know, I was like getting like trying to do the serve safe thing, and like I thought that was a big deal. When I got out of prison, nobody would hire me, even though I was overqualified to wash dishes. And so I got in the culinary arts school, and like one day they came to me and they're like, Chevy, we're gonna get you out of here. And I had requested to go to Gardner prison, and they're like, and for whatever reason I had everything good that I was, so they sent me to Gardner. And like each prison has its own vibes and different, you know. So like I forgot, I was like kind of skipped over the Walpole and went straight to Shirley Mack's. But they classified me, and like, so I was in Walpole for a while, and like basically you have to figure out your own little route in Walpole, and maybe you meet somebody and you're like, hey, well, what do I do? And like you go out to the yard, and like maybe like there it is kind of sort of segregated by color there. Like there's a pull-up bar over here, that's the white pull-up bar, this is the black pull-up bar, this is the Spanish pull-up bar. And like it's the same way in Shirley Mack's too, but more or less obviously by gangs. And like the power of the prison is by gangs. Like I think some of the biggest gangs in Massachusetts are like the Bloods, and then like they have like another like prison gang. It's called the Nietas, and those are like the Spanish gangs. And like in Shirley Mack's, like I worked in the kitchen, and like so 80% of the guys that worked in the kitchen were Nietas, like the Spanish gang. So I don't know if that has something, like if it was just a coincidence or because of the power of the prison. Like say for instance, if you, like they need to run the prison, so they need people working. So like me, I lived on the green side when I first went to prison, when I went to Shirley Mack's. And then they, like for whatever, they have, and I worked in the prison, but most of the people that worked in the kitchen, they were from the gray side. But because of me, and I don't have any ties to any gangs, I could work in there. But eventually they moved me over there, but it was like me working with all the Spanish, all the Nietas or whatever. And like I forgot, I was talking about the star, and like I don't know the whole thing about it, but I know there's like a 6-point star, there's a 5-point star. The green, so like the green side of Shirley Mack's is like Crips, gangster disciples, like it's like they segregate the whole entire prison by gangs. So like because they can't let them out, and like they can't be in the chow hall. It's dangerous for the correctional officers, and it's dangerous for the inmates. Everybody wants to kill each other because they're in different gangs or they're from a different street or whatever. But luckily, I got out of there, and so I went to Gardner prison. And Gardner, I don't know. I had to find a place to sit in the chow hall. Obviously, I got to eat, so they pointed me in the direction of the white table. So I ended up sitting. And me, I don't really care who I sit with, and just so happens I sat with white people or whatever. And like one table over from me was a black table. And it was people I knew and played basketball with, and I was good friends with. Some of the people were local guys. And one of the main reasons why I chose Gardner Prison, because there's like, it's like when you know when you're choosing a college and you're like, oh, I want to go to this, and it's sort of like that. So you're like, I want to go to Gardner. I heard they have like a bocce, and like they have, you know, so whatever reason. And the reason why I chose Gardner is because it's closer to home to me. So I came, for whatever reason, and I had to serve my time. So I went to Gardner, and in Gardner prison, so like the whole entire prison is segregated by crimes, color, like, then obviously offenses. So Gardner prison is like a dominant sexual, it's a sex crime place where they send a lot of the like heinous sex offenders in Massachusetts. And like, I don't know if like my girlfriend tells me that I shouldn't be judgmental, and like, I wasn't in prison and I wasn't judging people and I wasn't pointing the finger, because obviously I've done my fair share of time and stuff like that. But like, so like, I had to put up with people, like a lot of sex offenders in Gardner prison. And like, I don't know if Massachusetts, like we're talking about all of this and that and like different types of things, and like the sex offenders have a lot of rights, you know, and they're in there for like, you know, raping women, molesting kids, and all. So I'm like living with all them people and stuff like that. And then another thing was like, not that I'm against it, because like like with the transgenders and sex, like people like that, like gay people or whatever, like that doesn't bother me at all. Like, and like I think I don't know if it was Strong Oak that pointed out to me a while ago that like people that are of like different genders or whatever, they there's a special place for them in our circle for the Native Americans. Like, I think they're called Two-Spirit people, and they're sacred or whatever. And yes, I had to deal with all that in Gardner. And like one day I was sitting there, I was eating where I sat. It was a lifer's table, and one day I was sitting there eating, and then someone hits me on the back. Hey, is anybody sitting here? And I looked up, I was like, what the hell? It was a guy that he just got transferred from Norfolk, and he had some fake boobs in his thing, and he had long hair, he had lipstick on. I was like, what the hell? And I was like, you can sit here, and I took off. I was scared. And then, so like when I was in Gardner prison, I got involved in like the Native American circle, because so like there was lifers that like fought, like Native Americans that fought for rights to have in prison, to have the sweat lodge, to have all like the sacred objects like the pipe and the tobacco and like, so like I was part of the circle. And like being in Gardner prison, despite like the obvious, like I was able to absorb tons of stuff. Like I was able to participate in sweat lodges and like learn a lot about Native American stuff and like spirituality. And like one of the first times I ever like smoked a pipe was in there. And for being Native American, it's like we use the pipe to carry our prayers. And I was able to experience a lot of stuff. And like I don't know, it's like I'm kind of like getting like sidetracked here, and like I don't want to keep going on, and I want to carry. But I was like, I was thinking about this for a long time, and it's better for me, like if anybody has any questions, like that I could answer it, and it would be like from my perspective, you know? And like, like I said, every place is different. And I just, this is like something that Strong Oak was, when she was speaking, like Strong Oak, like she wanted me to point this out. And like, so it goes like, by 1930, 75% of all Native children incarcerated in residential boarding schools. School did not close until 1984. I was like, wow, I was born in 85. But prison largest reservation in U.S. today, Natives incarcerated in U.S. today. And I don't know, I know I probably missed some things I wanted to say, but I'm gonna just have to turn it over to Carrie. Thank you.
Can you hear me? I'm gonna stand now. I sit for a living, so it's easier for me to stand. I want to thank Chevy for asking me to come. Originally, I was going to come for support. This morning, well, just to be here and be his support. And, you know, this morning he says, well, hey, man, do you think you can speak? And because we share a common 12-step program, it's nothing that hasn't happened before, thank you. Okay, I'm going to tell a little different story. And I'll start it with, you know, so he was talking about smoking the pipe for the first time when he was in prison. The first time I smoked a pipe, Neil Young Harvest was playing, and I was at Nichols College trying to get through a meteorology geology final. So that tells you a little bit about, I was incarcerated at 160 Elm Street, Franklin County House of Correction. But I'll go back because what I'm going to tell you about my incarceration and how I got there, I need to tell you my background. I'm originally from Pittsfield, Massachusetts. I'm a Berkshire boy, so I grew up with, you know, James Taylor at Tanglewood, the BSO. I'm the son of a father who was the first black bank manager in Massachusetts. His name was James Williamson, and he was the manager of Berkshire Bank and Trust on North Street in our town. My mother never worked until my youngest brother, who was born in 1970, was able to come home off the bus and live. We had a beautiful house. We had two houses, actually. And I was a product of private schools from the time I can remember. My mother was born in Tallahassee, Alabama, and my father was born in Reidsville, North Carolina in the early 30s. So they grew up in segregation, obviously, in the South. That's my phone. It's probably my daughter, whose birthday is in 2 days. I need an Apple Watch. Like, yeah, okay. So anyway, you know, I grew up in Pittsfield of these two wonderful human beings who had survived being told which bathroom to use, where they could eat, just some of the most ungodly shit ever. Thank you. Yep, Gabrielle Nicole Williamson, 2 missed calls. That's my child, who turns 40 on Monday. Yeah, well, I'll just speak a little bit about her. I tell her she's the smartest woman in the world. She's a RN. I tell her she's the smartest woman in the world because she was born on March 4th, 1979, and 6 months later, I went away for my freshman year. And I told her, you're probably the only 6-month-old to ever go to college. And she says, that's why I'm so smart. Yeah, okay. But anyways, I grew up in a place that, you know, Italians, Poles, Jews, African Americans. It was a wonderful time, the Berkshires in the 60s and 70s. You know, we didn't have to worry about, you know, staying out late and whatever. Parks were open in the summertime, and, you know, the majority of my friends now are from my time in Pittsfield. So, you know, there's this wonderful melting pot of people. I didn't know anybody, I don't think, who had been in jail. I knew, let me take that back. I knew people who were, when I was 8, 9, 10, 11-year-old, were freaking activists, okay? I knew a guy, and I've known him all my life, that not until earlier this week did I understand that he was part of a group called the Black 14 at the University of Wyoming. His name is Tony Gibson. He's a football player. He was a football player. I played football with his nephew. Tony Gibson obviously made it from Pittsfield to University of Wyoming, Division I, and they played Brigham Young in 1969. And Brigham Young had this kind of, it wasn't kind of, it was racist shit that went on. And Wyoming had 14 black players, and they just crushed BYU. And after, because they wore these armbands that had 14 written on, just the number 14, all of them were thrown off the team. So Tony ended up back in Pittsfield, and they had the picture. And, you know, I got the sound down, and I'm doing something. They show an old picture. I said, that looks like a guy I know. And, you know, I go back to doing what I'm doing, and then at the end it says, Tony Gibson went back to Massachusetts and has worked for a power company for 38 years. And this obviously was written, or the film was made years ago. And he worked for Western Mass Electric. And I said, I knew that was him. So I'm texting my brother, who's the head IT guy at Penn State. And he graduated Pittsfield High in '69. He says, is that Tony Gibson, Black 14? He says, yep. Never knew about these stories about men that I knew in Pittsfield. So anyways, these are the kind of people. My brother couldn't get a deferment. Second semester of his sophomore year, he ends up in Vietnam. First and only time I ever heard my father say the F word, because his son had to go and fight and possibly die. We had a friend named Wayne Pratt who joined the Marine Corps, went to Vietnam. 3 weeks later, Wayne Pratt came back in a box. And my father didn't want that happening to his firstborn son. So he can't get the deferment. My father swears, and he goes about making a life while his son's in Vietnam, for all of us. Now, I never was a saint. I always got in like little shit, which ended up being a little bit higher than little shit. But my father was always there for me, and he always knew a guy named Jake Barnini, who was the clerk of courts in my town. So it was like, oh, Gary, what are you doing here? Get out. You know, I was just little kid stuff. So, you know, I go on and, you know, I go to college. I have a child. I go to college. I graduate, and I become a corporate bookkeeper for KB Toys. And I did that for a lot of years in the early to mid-'80s, and I got addicted to cocaine and alcohol. I like Tanqueray. Kind of sidetracked me from doing the things that I wanted to do. About that time, my father got diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer. And he passed away on May 19th, 1985, at the age of 50. It happens to be the same day that Malcolm X was born. Now, that has significance in my life too, and why I'm standing here in front of you. Because although my mother, a very Christian woman, believes in the Martin Luther King side, my father always taught us the Malcolm X side. You don't turn the other cheek. And I always gravitated to that. So, like I said, my father passed. I ended up in rehab in '89, got clean and sober, and by the grace of God, I haven't had a drink or a drug since. And this year, September 1st, hopefully, with God's grace, I'll celebrate 30 years of sobriety.
Wow.
So, that being said, the stuff I'm going to tell you that I've done in sobriety is crazy. So, I'm clean. I become accounts payable for Hospice of Hampshire County when I moved to Northampton because they had done such great things for my father, keeping him pain-free while he was dying on a bed in our house at 124 Danforth Avenue in Pittsfield. I go to work there, but I'm also doing meetings up at the detox. There used to be a detox in Greenfield that was next to the hospital, just a brick building. I forget what it was called, but it's just a brick building. And I would go up there every Monday night to do meetings. And I'd go back and work my week at hospice, go back another Monday night, and I did that for about a year, and then one night the director said to me, "You ever think about doing this for a living?" I was like, no. You know, at that time I had almost 3 kids in diapers. I had a 2-year-old and I had twin girls. They're now 26. You know, the money from hospice was a lot more than I could get from the detox. So I kept doing that. I ended up, after a couple of years, going to work for the detox. All right, fine. So I, you know, just kept doing what I do. I end up splitting up with the mother of my 3 youngest kids. We lived in Northampton on Fort Hill Terrace. We had a beautiful house on Fort Hill Terrace. We break up, and I end up in Greenfield living full-time. And that's how I ended up in Franklin County. So fast forward a few years, I meet a woman in 2004, and we get married. And we worked in the same place. At this time now, I'm doing logistics for Department of Defense, which don't ask me how I ended up there, but I did, and I'm good at what I do. I still do that today, just not for the DOD. I moved Minuteman missiles for the 90th, 91st, and 341st Minuteman Missile Squadrons, Minot Malmstrom and F.E. Warren Air Force Base, and also SPA War for the Navy, Special Underwater Warfare in North Charleston, South Carolina. So I do that, we get married, and we live a pretty good life. We moved to Turner's Falls shortly after we had a house on Montague City Road. Well, fast forward July 2013, we take a Sunday off from church, which was a big thing, to go fishing. And we're fishing a place called Cranberry Pond on the, I think it's Sunderland Montague line. And we're fishing there for 3 hours, and everything, boom, boom, every time I cast, I'm catching something, and you know, it kind of takes the challenge out of it. So after 3 hours, we want to go to a place in Turner's Falls by Unity Park, has a little thing that we can sit and throw our line in, and we know it's hard because we lived right up the street from that. So we're driving back, and I've got, you know, my Volvo wagon, and I've got my blonde wife over here, and we end up behind a truck, a black shitbox truck that's got a fucking Confederate flag in the back of it. And I should have known that it wasn't gonna be good. So we're behind them, the passenger leans out of the truck and flips me off. So my wife, who knows me, just automatically goes, "Don't." And I'm like, "I'm not gonna do anything, I'm just driving, you know, I'm good." So we're going down by this Kostansky's funeral home, and around this curve that ends up down by Unity Park. And the guy start the stop and stop and start thing, you know, where they hit the brakes, so you gotta stop. So I do, and I look, and my wife's head is coming toward the windshield, and I put my arm out to hold her from hitting the windshield, because 18 months earlier, she had a stroke at 39 years old. And one thing I remember the neurologist at UMass Worcester saying is that she can't hit her head. So when I saw that, I don't remember too much after, but I remember the guys in the truck kind of cornering down the street, so I couldn't get around them. It was summertime, so Unity Park had kids all in it. It was about 12:30, whatever. I tried to turn up L Street, and they blocked it, and I put the car in park. Now, when I was in Nichols, as a freshman, I signed up for ROTC, and I ended up doing my classroom training at WPI, Worcester Polytech, and once a month I'd end up at Fort Devens in Air. Now this is 1979, and the guys who trained me were 82nd Airborne Rangers. And, you know, I had always fancied myself as a guy who walked the line between pacifism and activism. Both the guys, well, first the passenger got out of the car. The passenger got out, I got out. When I got out, before I went and started seeing what this guy's problem was, my granddaughter, who was probably, let's see, Madison was probably 12 or 13 at the time. She had just come up for a weekend from Pittsfield from my daughter's oldest child, and she had left her baseball bat on the back seat of the car. So I grabbed the bat, and me and the guy who flipped me off were talking, and the conversation went kind of like this. Oh, what's that, a bat? What are you gonna do with that? Hit me? Go ahead, I'll sue you, that's what we do up here. My response was, dude, you don't know how much danger you're in right now. So, we're talking like this, face to face. And all of a sudden I see the driver get out, and the driver starts making his way down the pickup. So I'm holding the bat like this, holding it straight up as I'm arguing with this guy. All of a sudden I feel the bat shaking. Guy's got a hold of the bat. They yank the bat down. He takes a swing, and as his arm is outstretched, bang, I come down with the bat. And his arm goes instantly like an L. Down he goes. Guy over here comes charging at me. He takes a swing. I move back. Bang, I hit him across the chest here. Down he goes. And now I'm standing with two guys on the ground, yelling and screaming. I'm a black man in Turners Falls, Massachusetts, with a baseball bat in my hand. So, get out of whatever kind of tunnel vision I'm in. I get in the car and I drive to the police station. And I say, listen, I just dropped two guys down on L Street, and the cops come out, yeah, we know we got somebody down there. It's like, listen, man, you know, I was fishing with my wife, and my wife's in shock. She's in total, she hasn't said a word the whole time. She's in shock. And when I look at her, it's almost like she wants to say, who did I marry, Jackie Chan? You know, because in a matter of like 30 seconds a minute, two guys are on the ground. I know I'm in trouble, because I know where I am. I know I'm in the whitest county in Massachusetts. I know I just dropped two white guys. I don't even know. They could be the son of the police chief, city councilman. I don't know. But I know they're on the ground and they're going to the hospital. So cops come out. I'm at the police station. I say, you know, I dropped them, blah, blah, blah. I say, am I under arrest? And they were like, no, but you can't leave. And I said, I'm not under arrest, but I can't leave. Okay, all right. So I tell my wife, I'm gonna be arrested. So, you know, go make the calls that you need to make and, oh, okay, all right. The long and short of it is, I got arrested. I went to jail after 10 months of finagling for the right judge. We ended up with this wonderful woman named Mary Lou Roop. Mary Lou Roop started in Pittsfield as a defender, a public defender. They wanted to put me in prison. No record, no nothing. They wanted to put me in prison for 6 to 8 years. Mary Lou Roop put me at the minimum, 2.5 years over here. DA was pissed. Now, I do my time, I get out. Part of that 2.5 years was 10 years probation after. So I'm on probation as I stand here in front of you. Now, since that, I've been out for almost 3 years. It'll be 3 years in April. I've gone to the Caribbean. I've gone pretty much to Saratoga every weekend during the summer. And I'm getting ready in 56 days to go back to the Caribbean. I gotta go in front of the judge to ask the judge to leave the freaking state, okay? And that's that thing, that hook that keeps me in there. Now, when I was in jail, I wasn't doing a lot of stuff that other guys were doing. You know what I was doing? I was reading Michelle Alexander, The New Jim Crow. I was anything that Ava DuVernay. I read this book called A World Apart by Christina Rathbone about women in Framingham. So I knew what I was, and I've always been a guy that studies stuff. I've been indoctrinated to what happens to people that look like me when we get caught in the system. I knew what was in store for me. I know what's in store today. I went last month trying to get those 10 years taken off, even though it's now 7.5 years. And the DA fought tooth and nail. The judge, who I thought was gonna agree with me, because he asked the DA, how much blood do you want from this man? I've taken every urinalysis. I've never violated. Got the thing in the mail. I'm like, oh, okay, get home from work. I'm like, oh, okay. It says denied. So I will live under their rules, paying $65 a month. I don't have to, they did drop the urinalysis. You know, how many urinalysis are you gonna take from me that are gonna come up like negative before you understand that when I tell you I'm 29 years clean and sober, I'm not lying to you. So that's how I come to stand in front of you now. That's what I face now. One of my friends, one of my good friends, woman that Chevy knows, named Reverend Schindler. Reverend, when I told her that I'm gonna do logistics, but I'm gonna do them for an agricultural company now in Conway, says to me, Kerry, bread not bombs. Because Reverend knew that I had done that, so these are bread not bombs. It made me feel 100% better. I wrote a book that is yet to be unpublished. It has yet to be published. While I was there, 300 pages of double-spaced text, 20 pages of photos. I was published 3 times or 4 times in Daily Hampshire Gazette and The Recorder. And like most things in my life, I made sure that time wasn't wasted, as today is not wasted. So I want to thank you. I'm humbled to stand here in front of you, and I really don't have too much to say. I appreciate you guys listening. Thank you.
Sit up here too.
I just want to say one thing about what you're saying about probation, which is I think people can hear me. I mean, in Massachusetts, I always say that there are so few people in prison compared to other places. But there are tens of thousands of people on probation, really, really long probation.
Yep.
And the longer you're on probation or the longer you're on parole, there are 90,000 people on probation and parole and in prison, right? So, I mean, most of that 90,000 is probation and parole. And so the longer you're on probation, the longer you're on parole, not only have to pay, or wear ankle monitor or whatever, you stand the chance of being violated.
Yep.
If you're on probation for 10 years, you know, you're like fair game if you have a jerk for a PO.
I have a question. When you were doing the statistics about how many black people were in prison and how many white people, when you say black people, were you including the Native Americans as black people? Because I didn't hear anything.
No, I wasn't.
Oh, because I didn't hear anything about if they were Native American.
No, I didn't break out, I mean, I didn't talk about Latinos, which make up a huge portion, and I didn't break out Native American either. I was just talking about the difference between black people and white people.
Hi, thank you so much. That was really just helpful. I'm actually a teacher up in Springfield, Vermont, and we have a prison in Springfield, Vermont, and so that definitely changes the landscape of both what jobs people have and therefore what outlook they have in terms of who they think is dangerous and how they react. But my question is about the quote that you had read from Angela Davis. And that quote, I remember it said something along the lines of, prisons hide social problems, poverty and homelessness and mental illness, excuse me. And so I'm wondering if you see addressing those societal ills as also a way to reduce the prison population, and if our work doing that can even, kind of keep people out of the system itself.
100%. Yes, absolutely. I mean, if there wasn't this huge investment in prisons and jails, then there could be a huge investment in all of the things that prevent people from going to prisons and jails. Mental health, I mean, that's why I talked about the cutback in mental health services, but the investment in, same thing with education. I mean, all of the disinvestment, there's been all of the disinvestments. And then there've been all of these investments. You know, in Massachusetts, it costs $1.2 billion to keep people locked up. Now think about it costs $2,000 or $3,000 to keep somebody locked up in a jail here, Franklin County Jail, for a month. What could you do with $2,000 a month for somebody? You could buy a lot of services out in the community. But instead, they would rather put it in the jails. So absolutely. One thing I want to say about Vermont, it's just like for the very, very, very first time, there's this bill to try to end life without the possibility of parole. The same kind of bill was just introduced in Vermont for the very first time, which is great. One other thing I just wanted to mention, which, so the Real Cost of Prisons has a website, but it also has a Facebook page, and it's a public page, and I post, like I just posted this thing about Vermont, and so I post things every day about mass incarceration around the country, some Massachusetts, so people can like that page and you can learn a lot from what I post, I think.
Is that listed on one of the sheets?
Yeah, it's on the sheet. I mean, not the URL, but you just if you go to Facebook, just type in Real Cost of Prisons Project. You'll get it.
Can I just ask one more question?
Yeah.
I'm wondering for the guys. I myself am Arab, and so I wonder what you think about the crimes of our government against people across the world. You spoke about Vietnam. And so I think about George W. Bush, and the government also, that was the people that bring the government around him, who are complicit in murdering 1 million Iraqis, and they're not in prison. And you all, you told your story about going to prison for hitting someone with a bat, while this person has, led the way in killing millions of people. And so I wonder what your reaction to that is. Thank you so much.
For me, I've never been one that's, even though I work for the DOD, I've never been one that has been like blindly okay with everything America does. I mean, I'm wearing a I support Colin Kaepernick shirt today. In the text that we're talking about today, I'll talk about somebody who, for liberals, a lot of times they don't want to hear it. I'm a liberal too, but a lot of times they don't want to hear it. Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton's the guy who signed that thing that she was talking about this amount gets you this much time, this amount gets you this much time. This kind of cocaine as opposed to that kind of cocaine gets you more time because crack was big in the black sections, whereas powdered cocaine sniffing, which is what I started doing, was bigger in suburbia. I think the history of America is rife with a bunch of bullshit.
Can we quote that?
Yes, you can, please, yes. It is, and toward anybody who doesn't fit that waspy old white guy, we're gonna make the rules and you're gonna follow them even though they don't mean shit to us. We're gonna keep you down. So you as an Arab, you know the history of United States backing Israel against people that look like you. I don't have to go into that, which continues to this day with Donald Trump and Bibi Netanyahu. I try not to get emotional when it comes to things like this, but I can't help it. So it's better that I stop right there, because I'll get going on something and I'll piss somebody off. All right, thank you.
Can I just say one thing in response? I mean, you mentioned Clinton, Bush. I mentioned Elliot Abrams, who's a war criminal, who's now what? Being a war criminal in Venezuela. I mean, these guys, they never go away. You know what I mean? They keep being resurrected over and over and over again. So, I mean, anyway.
Another question back here?
Yeah, I just wanted to share something that came to me from listening. I was just thinking about how life is when you go into the jail and they kind of sort you out by color and gang affiliation. Is a way of keeping the recidivism rate going because they're not doing anything in the jail to address those issues. And I think when Cheryl and I met with Chevy, you were sharing about this young man that came into the jail, and he wasn't really affiliated with a gang, but he was able to get affiliated with a gang once he got in. And he ended up doing a crime that would have really added to his time. But I'm thinking the way it's all set up is designed to keep you coming back. That's what I'm hearing.
Survival.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a revolving door.
She can.
No, just say whatever you want.
Oh yeah. Me and Sean Oak, we've already talked about this a lot, and I feel like these guys have a lot of good things to say, and she is right, but I'm gonna let Lois touch in on that. You want to?
Yeah, I mean, what you're saying is true. It's set up to be a revolving door. That's what it's set up for. That's why I said corrections, they're calling them Department of Corrections, is a joke. It's an absolute joke.
We are running over a little bit. I hope that's all right. And we'll take a couple of more questions before we wrap up, and then we'll have announcements.
Yeah.
A change. I want to specifically ask you, Debbie, you talked about the Gardner prison, and I know Medicine Zora used to do a lot of the ceremony there. I don't know since he died who's doing it, but it seemed like that was a big turning point for you, and getting out of this violent circle and getting into your own spirit. Can you say something about that, and if you saw that helping the other guys who were in these ceremonies and smoking the pipe and getting into their culture?
Yeah, I don't know, like, being in prison and Gardner and being part of the Native American circle and, like, showing up every week religiously and, like, learning and, like, I was learning, it's peer-led, so basically I'm learning from somebody else. Like, she was talking about the lifers, like my friend Bernie, he was one of the founding people that, like, was able to get all the rights and stuff like that in the prison. It's funny because he actually got parole. I bumped into him, but he was probably scared to death when he seen me, because when you're on parole in Massachusetts, it's very, very, very strict. If they catch you jaywalking, they could throw you back in. But yeah, I would I would say that the Native American stuff has, like, being part of my spirituality and reconnecting me has done, like, I've built, like, really, like, some everlasting friendships. And this wasn't just in Gardner. It started off in Greenfield Jail when I first got connected with Strong Oak and Dave Pinkham. And like, me and Dave, we're like, he's like my grandfather. Like, me and him, we've been close together for 11 years. Like, not only, like, being able to be part of the Sweat Lodge and, like, just, like, a lot of the teachings of staying willing and trying to stay open-minded and, like, just, like, being, like, willing to learn and, like, just, there's so many great things. I can't mention them all. But yeah, it was great. It was a great experience. And if I never went to prison, who knows, maybe I never would have been able to be a part of that. But
thank you guys for sharing your story. Really, really appreciate that. And I'm sorry you went to jail over that incident, but I'm so glad you nailed those guys. As a white guy, I'm so glad you nailed those guys. They're an embarrassment to the human race. You know, what I want to ask is the trend of private jails, and where do you see that horror going at this point?
So of people who are U.S. citizens, 10% are in private jails. 90% are in state, federal, or county jails, prisons. So the main growth area for private prisons is immigration detention. That's where the growth is. Now, most everything in, people focus on private prisons like they're the, especially bad or the devil or whatever. But most things in prisons and jails are privatized. Even if the jail isn't privatized, the health care is privatized, the food is privatized, the building of it, the phones are privatized. Yeah, commissary, all that stuff that is bilking everybody, not just the people who are incarcerated, but their families, to pay these outrageous phone bills, to pay, I mean, this jail here is making a shitload on phones, on commissary. And where is that going? That's all privatized. So to me, this idea of private prisons, it's like the eye is not on the ball. To me, the ball is all of the stuff that's happening at every jail and prison. Yes, if you want to focus on immigrant detention, that's where you need to go, because that is privatized. But everything else is happening to every single person, their families, who are paying these outrageous amounts of money for a minute worth of calls, stupid, $1 for a little package of ramen noodles. That's all privatized. And that, to me, is the place that people need to look at in terms of privatization. And that is, there's not one jail or prison in the whole country that doesn't have, health care, everything privatized. So that to me is like, people are looking over here, you know, a GO for this 10% or whatever, CCA, but really what they need to be looking at. I mean, the other place that GO and these places are making a ton of money now is electronic monitors, so-called ankle bracelets. That's all privatized, and that is a growth industry. Because all these people that are going on parole and probation, that's what they're paying for. And that's a kind of surveillance and a kind of control that is completely out of sight. And so all of that is privatized. And these places like CCA and GEO, they're starting to rake it in. The people talk alternatives to incarceration. Yeah, it's not good to be incarcerated. On the other hand, they're controlled 24/7 by like being plugged into an outlet.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for talking and sharing. I am a reporter, and I've been looking into the Suboxone clinic at the Greenfield Jail. And I have sources within the jail and from a person who's gone through it. And there are conflicting views on that program. And outwardly, it's kind of billed as a progressive thing to get people out of jail. But it seems that it's more complicated than that. And I don't know if you would have time to speak to that right now. Anyone, if you know about it or have been through it. And if you would want to speak afterwards, I'd be very interested.
I think they started that.
Yeah,
They started
they're
that
doing
near
it.
the
Yeah,
they're doing it.
end of my sentence.
yeah, they're doing it.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know much
I'll be glad to talk about it.
So I have a question. When, I was going to ask for Carrie, when you were in the Greenfield prison, was it, did you have the same or similar experience with like Chevy had, or was there more blatant or outward racism?
And I think for Chevy, when Chevy spoke about prison. Now, there is a marked distinction between Chevy in prison and Walpole, Gardner, Shirley, and me going over here to 160 Elm Street. First of all, the racism that I experienced over here didn't really manifest itself as racism as much as classism. Because a couple of the people that worked there knew what I did on the outside, knew what I got paid, knew what my house looked like, and it kind of manifested itself in, well, you're on my turf now, you're gonna do what I tell you. Me and Chevy were cellmates for one day, his last day there. We were in a place called APOD, which was the DDU, the disciplinary detention unit, because I would not, being on this earth for 55 years at the time, maybe 54, I would not compromise who I was. And it bumped heads with people that wore stars. And their thing was just punch a dial, hit a button on a walkie-talkie, and off Carrie goes to wear yellow. And I can look at myself in the mirror today and tell people, yes, I'm one of the, I don't know what the percentage is, 1 in 9 black men, black fathers that have been in jail. You know, I'm okay with who I am because I know I'm not an assault and batterer with whatever it is, deadly intention, some, you know, law. But no, I didn't find it as much racist as I did classist. I've seen, you know, because this is Franklin County Jail, so, you know, you get guys from Ashburnham and up that way that have never really seen black people.
Yeah.
And then they've never really seen black people who speak the way I speak, the way I think, you know, the things I say, what I do, you know, it just, and I say Ashburnham because I had one beef with a guy from Ashburnham. But no, it was more classist. You know, we're better than you. We wear gray uniforms and you guys wear green or yellow or red or what's the other color, blue? I don't know.
Thank you so much for an amazing morning. I just would like to add, I'm sorry for I apologize for my ignorance, but I'd like to add. I'd like, is this okay?
Yeah.
Okay, I
Talk
apologize
into
for
it.
my ignorance, but I'd like to ask you both what the laws are in Massachusetts about your ability to vote. Are you allowed, you're on probation, Harry, are you allowed to vote?
I vote, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
I vote,
okay.
Yeah,
You can't vote when you're in prison.
yeah, I vote.
Okay.
You better
But in our
believe it.
state, you can vote if
Yeah.
you're, once you're out of prison.
Bernie didn't get in though.
Yeah, it's weird, my girlfriend made me fill out that, my girlfriend just recently, like the other day, she made me fill out that thing, or she filled it out for me, I just had to sign it, and she dropped it off at the town hall, because she's like telling me that I gotta vote.
Good.
But me, I'm not really like, I mean, I probably should be, and obviously I'm willing to learn, but I'm not like a political person.
Glad you have your girlfriend.
Can I say one more thing about that? I come from, and you heard me talk about my mother and father, I come from people that couldn't vote
Yeah,
for a
exactly.
long time. So when, in, must have been 1978, I think 17 or 18 you had to go, my mother drove us all in a car to the post office. You have to go to the post office to register to vote, and she did that because she couldn't.
I see one more hand up, and then, but before I even acknowledge someone's hand, I want to just say, don't forget that Lois has given us a whole sheet of paper of things that we can act on, and that we can do something about these situations. One more question here.
It might be too big a topic, but I'm really interested, in starting with what Lois said, but then, other things that everyone commented on, and this sort of weird thing of Massachusetts having this very regressive prison system and the liberalism of, or the myth of the liberalism here. I mean, is there a connection? That's what I'd like to know.
Well, I can speak to that. I think there is. I think that, well, one, I talked about who are the legislators. And so that's a really important piece of this. And then the other piece of it is that people who are white liberals have never thought that this was something that they needed to be concerned about. They could be concerned about everything in the world, literally, or out of the world, every single thing, except this one thing. And as long as people don't give a damn, white people in Massachusetts are the majority, the big majority. And so-called white liberals are the big majority. I don't know if they're the big majority, but people that think of themselves as liberals. And until white liberals or white people don't wake up and think of this of what's going on, if for no other reason than if you pay taxes, I don't care if you pay no taxes, you're paying gas tax, you're paying sales tax, everything is paying for this system. Not just the jails and the prisons, the court system, the state police, the on and on and on. And so you're paying, we're all paying for it. And by paying for it, we're all culpable. And people need to, even if you don't know somebody in jail, or you think, somebody, you don't know anybody that's ever been incarcerated, blah, 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 blah. You're still paying for this system, and you're keeping it going by paying for it. And that's why I think it is so, so, so important that white people wake up and get involved with this. White people are involved with everything. But this. Why? Why? Why is this not a concern for white people? So-called liberals even. Why?
On that note.
On that note. That is the conclusion of our program, except